When people hear the word governance, they sometimes imagine slow meetings and thick documents. But security governance is really about making decisions predictable and making responsibility unmistakable. Security work touches almost every part of an organization, from how systems are built to how data is handled to how incidents are managed, and that breadth creates a constant risk of confusion. If nobody knows who owns a decision, work stalls or gets done inconsistently. If nobody can explain why a decision was made, trust erodes and the next decision becomes harder. Security governance is the set of routines and agreements that keep security moving in a coordinated way, even when priorities compete and people disagree. It is not a replacement for technical controls, because it is the way you decide which technical controls matter most and who must deliver them. For a beginner, the simplest definition is that governance is how an organization steers security, and steering requires clear roles, clear goals, and a reliable way to measure progress. Committees are one of the most common governance tools, and it helps to think of them as decision rooms rather than discussion clubs. A security committee exists to bring the right stakeholders together so decisions can be made with full context, not to endlessly debate. Committees can operate at different levels, such as a senior group that sets direction and approves risk decisions, and a working group that coordinates projects and resolves day-to-day conflicts. The important beginner lesson is that a committee is only useful when it has a defined purpose, a defined membership, and a clear expectation of what outputs it produces. If a committee meets without a clear agenda and without the authority to decide, it becomes a time sink that people avoid, which weakens governance. If a committee has authority but lacks the right representation, it makes decisions that are disconnected from reality, which creates resistance and poor outcomes. Good committees are balanced, meaning security is present, technology is present, business is present, and risk owners are present. Because committees can easily become too broad or too frequent, it is important to understand what problems they are supposed to solve. One problem is prioritization, because security often has more possible work than available time. Another problem is alignment, because different teams can interpret risk differently and may pull in different directions. A third problem is accountability, because when many teams participate in a program, it can be unclear who must deliver which outcomes. Committees provide a place where trade-offs can be made openly, risks can be discussed in shared language, and decisions can be recorded. That record matters because it reduces re-arguing the same point later, and it protects people from being blamed for choices they did not make. For beginners, this is a powerful idea because it shows that governance is not mainly about compliance. It is about reducing chaos. When governance is healthy, you spend less time fighting about what to do and more time actually doing it. Charters are what make committees and governance bodies real, because a charter is the written agreement that defines purpose and authority. A charter should answer basic questions that otherwise become sources of conflict, such as what the group exists to accomplish, what decisions it can make, and what decisions it can only recommend. It should clarify membership, including who must attend, who can delegate, and who has a vote if voting is used. It should also clarify cadence, meaning how often the group meets, and how urgent decisions are handled between meetings. For a beginner, it is helpful to treat a charter as the rules of a game, because the game falls apart when players disagree about the rules. A charter does not need to be long, but it needs to be clear enough that people can point to it when confusion arises. The benefit is that clarity reduces friction and makes governance dependable rather than personality-driven. Charters also matter because security decisions often involve competing interests that cannot all be satisfied at the same time. A team may want to ship a feature quickly, while security may want time for review and testing. Leadership may want lower cost, while security may want more coverage and redundancy. The charter does not eliminate these trade-offs, but it defines how they will be handled and who gets to decide when there is a conflict. It can also define escalation paths, so disagreements do not linger at the working level forever. For beginners, it helps to see that a charter protects both sides in a conflict because it prevents security from becoming arbitrary and it prevents delivery teams from being surprised by last-minute requirements. When the rules are known in advance, negotiation becomes calmer and more productive. Over time, that calmness builds trust, and trust is one of the biggest accelerators of security work. Metrics are the third pillar in this episode title, and metrics are often misunderstood as numbers for their own sake. In governance, metrics exist to support decisions, not to decorate dashboards. A good security metric helps a governance group answer questions like whether risk is increasing or decreasing, whether a program is improving, and where limited resources should be applied next. Beginners sometimes believe that the goal is to measure everything, but measuring everything often produces noise, not insight. The goal is to measure what is meaningful, stable enough to track over time, and close enough to decisions that it can guide action. For example, a metric that shows how quickly critical vulnerabilities are remediated can support decisions about staffing or prioritization, because it connects directly to exposure. A metric that shows the number of alerts generated might not be helpful unless it is paired with data about true positives, response time, and workload impact. Metrics should illuminate, not confuse. A practical way to think about metrics is that they need three parts: a definition, a method of collection, and an interpretation. The definition clarifies what exactly is being counted, which prevents people from manipulating or misunderstanding the number. The method of collection clarifies where the data comes from and how often it is updated, which protects against stale or inconsistent reporting. The interpretation clarifies what the number means and what actions might be taken when it moves, because a metric without an action is just trivia. In governance settings, metrics should also include context like trends over time, thresholds that indicate concern, and segmentation that shows where the problem is concentrated. For beginners, this is a helpful way to avoid the trap of thinking that any number is automatically useful. A metric is only useful when it reduces uncertainty for decision makers. If it does not change what someone would do, it is not a governance metric. It is just data. Ownership clarity is the final pillar, and it is the one that turns governance from discussion into delivery. Ownership clarity means every important security outcome has a named owner who is accountable for progress, and that owner has the authority and resources to make progress. Without ownership clarity, security issues can bounce between teams with everyone agreeing it matters, but nobody doing the work. With ownership clarity, it becomes clear who must report status, who must resolve blockers, and who must explain delays. Ownership does not always mean one person does all the work, because many security outcomes require shared effort. Ownership means one person is responsible for coordinating and ensuring completion, similar to how a project lead keeps a project moving even when many contributors are involved. For beginners, it helps to see ownership as the answer to the question, who wakes up responsible for this today? That question sounds simple, but it is one of the most important in security. One way ownership clarity becomes real is through explicit assignment of responsibilities for different kinds of security artifacts and processes. Someone must own policies, meaning they keep them accurate, updated, and aligned with current risks. Someone must own risk exceptions, meaning they track them, review them, and ensure they expire or are renewed with intention. Someone must own incident response readiness, meaning exercises occur and gaps are addressed. Someone must own major security initiatives, meaning timelines, dependencies, and outcomes are managed. Without these ownership assignments, governance meetings can become repetitive status updates where the same issues appear month after month. With clear ownership, meetings can focus on removing obstacles and making decisions that speed progress. For beginners, the key is that ownership is not merely a label. It must be paired with a mechanism to hold owners accountable, such as regular reporting and clear expectations. Committees, charters, metrics, and ownership clarity also need to work together because each one supports the others. Committees provide the forum for decisions, but charters define the authority and boundaries of that forum. Metrics provide evidence for decisions, but ownership clarity ensures that someone can act on what the metrics reveal. Ownership clarity ensures work is delivered, but committees can resolve conflicts and allocate resources when owners are blocked. If you have committees without charters, you get uncertainty and frustration. If you have metrics without ownership, you get dashboards that everyone nods at, but nothing changes. If you have ownership without committees, owners may get stuck when they need cross-team decisions or leadership support. Governance maturity comes from building these parts as a coherent system, not as disconnected pieces. For beginners, thinking in systems is important because security problems are rarely isolated. and governance is the system that coordinates the response. It is also important to understand that governance should match the size and complexity of the organization, because too much governance can be as harmful as too little. In a small organization, a single governance group with a simple charter might be enough, because the same people wear multiple hats and communication is direct. In a larger organization, multiple committees may be necessary, because decisions need to happen at different levels and across different domains. The mistake beginners sometimes make is assuming that governance equals bureaucracy, when the real goal is controlled coordination. A governance structure that is too heavy will slow decisions, frustrate teams, and encourage workarounds. A governance structure that is too light will allow inconsistencies, hidden risks, and repeated surprises. Good governance finds the minimum structure that produces clarity, speed, and accountability. That is why charters should be practical and metrics should be decision-ready, because the goal is effectiveness, not ceremony. Another beginner misconception is that governance is only about compliance or external audits, but governance is just as valuable for internal success. Even if no regulator ever asks, an organization still needs to know which security work matters most, what the current risk posture is, and who is responsible for improving it. Governance creates a memory for the organization, capturing decisions and reasons so the program does not depend on one person's recollection. It also creates continuity when staff changes occur, because new leaders can see how and why certain approaches were chosen. During incidents, governance also becomes the decision backbone, because the organization needs to make fast calls about containment, communication, and recovery. If governance has been practiced in calm times, it is more likely to function during crisis. For beginners, this reinforces the idea that governance is not a separate activity from security. It is how security becomes reliable and repeatable. As a final perspective, establishing security governance is about turning security into an organized responsibility rather than a collection of heroic efforts. Committees create the decision forums that coordinate across teams. Charters define purpose, authority, and boundaries so the forums produce outcomes rather than chatter. Metrics provide evidence so decisions can be grounded in reality and tracked over time. Ownership clarity ensures that decisions translate into action and that progress is visible and accountable. When those four elements are present, security work becomes calmer, faster, and easier to sustain, because people know how to decide and who must deliver. When they are missing, security becomes a constant negotiation and a constant surprise, which leads to drift and risk accumulation. For a brand new learner, the big takeaway is that governance is a core security capability because it determines whether the organization can consistently choose, execute, and improve its defenses. That is what makes governance not just an administrative idea, but a practical foundation for everything else in a security program.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.